to Retro Warriors episode 285.
Woo.
As always, I'm your host, Justin Baker, and as always, I'm joined by resident old bastard, Chris Saturn.
Hello.
Hello, Saturn, we have housekeeping. I wanted to mention to people out there that are listening to the show,
Yes, sir.
that the way podcasts work, and I already feel like I sound like an asshole.
Well,
So
first you take a mommy podcast and a daddy podcast, and they love each other very much.
The way podcasts work is that wherever you listen to the show, we're glad, we're happy, it's wonderful that you listen, and we love to have you. But just so you know, that the way podcasts work is they are hosted on a main RSS feed in every podcatcher place out there: iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon's thing, yada, yada, yada. All pull from that main RSS feed.
Which one of those did you make up?
None of them.
Oh, shit.
So if you are listening to the show and going, hey, sometimes your episodes don't post promptly at 6 a.m. Central on Monday, or sometimes it goes a couple weeks and then a bunch of them post, it is not because the feed is behind. It's because whatever podcast aggregator you're listening to the show on is
bad,
behind, or not refreshing. For example, Google Podcasts is one of the shittest services on the face of the natural planet.
Yeah.
And they don't think I own my own podcast, despite me messaging them and saying, hey, you guys aren't updating my podcast. Would you mind updating my podcast according to my feed? And them going, no, we changed your feed. And me going, why would you change the feed? The feed's not changed in 6 years. Why is it changed? And they went, we don't know. You don't own it, so that sucks. And I'm like, of course I don't own it. You changed it to a feed I don't own. But now
Thanks,
I'm just
Google.
Yelling at Google. All this to say, if you go to retrowarriors.net, and you go to the podcast link up at the top, there is a direct RSS feed to our direct feed that we personally post the show on. That is always the most up-to-date place to get the show. Also, as much as I don't want to funnel people into certain ecosystems, iTunes is almost always up-to-date. It does seem to be the best and most up-to-date, except for the main feed. And the show is also manually posted on YouTube every Monday by our producer, Guy. He posts the show every Monday. So those are really the three best ways to listen to the show. If you're saying, hey, I'm having lapses or issues or it's not posting, obviously they're all also posted on Patreon, but if you're not on Patreon. So the best way to listen to the show is through our main RSS feed or through your personal Patreon feed. Those are the two areas we personally have control of and post on. And I feel like I've been talking about it for so long, so I'm just going to talk about other things now.
And you can get an app on any mobile platform that will just let you import an RSS feed. To allow you to
actually, a lot of podcast applications these days don't let you manually import RSS feeds.
But there are still apps available.
Yeah, there are some. And some of them have been obfuscating actual manual RSS feed subscriptions, which is not great. I'll say this: whatever podcast application you're using, if it does not let you subscribe to regular RSS feeds, then
go ahead and replace it.
They are actively damaging to podcasters, if I can get on my soapbox. Anyway, I got a new arcade stick.
Yes. I also got
Christmas.
A new arcade stick.
Yeah, I got it, and then you were like, yo, dog, I'm super jelly, and you bought the same one.
That's not exactly how it went down, but we'll say that's how it went down.
For Christmas, I got the new 8BitDo arcade stick, the kind of NES Advantage themed looking stick that they have. It is a wireless arcade stick. It has Bluetooth and a 2.4 gigahertz wireless dongle. It also has USB-C.
Now, this is not the N30 arcade stick.
Correct, which is their older stick that has not been available for about a year now. It's been a while. And I've been playing a lot of games with it. And really enjoying it. I did open it up to take a look at some of the inside, and I do have some issues there. That said, it is not name brand parts inside of it. They are knockoffs, but they're decent ones. Buttons feel okay. I put in I play with octagonal gates. I can't do the square gate in a joystick, so I had to open it up and put on an octagonal gate. And the stick in there is pretty close to a Sanwa JLF for anybody that knows their arcade parts. It does have a little more play in it, it feels like, than one of those, but it's a fine stick. I love how flexible it is, because being Bluetooth, USB-C, and 2.4 gigahertz wireless with a dongle means I can basically plug it in 50 different ways. And my favorite feature is the legend. There's a switch, so you can switch it into X input mode. So it'll work on a PC.
Right.
And it has an LED under the acrylic panel next to the buttons that lights up the button legend. So all your button labels. And if you switch it to switch mode, it switches to a different LED and changes the physical legend on the stick.
It's really nice.
It's really cool.
So while you were talking about opening it up and what all pieces are in there, I just plugged it in and hit buttons. It was fun.
Yeah. Which I would too if I was not personally offended by Squaregate joysticks. I don't know why. I cannot get used to them, but I can. Thankfully, swapping the gate out it's just a little clippy thing you clip on the bottom of your stick, and it restricts the movement in a different way. So it's an easy part. My only real major issue is that on 8BitDo's website, they sell this stick as quote-unquote ultra-moddable. And they list all these different brands of sticks that it's compatible with. One, it doesn't fit about half the sticks from each manufacturer because it doesn't have the height clearance for them. And two, on the original stick they have in there, they soldered the wire connections to the stick. So to get it out, you have to desolder it. And three, they did not use the traditional 5-pin joystick wiring harness. They instead use an 8-pin wiring harness. And what this all means for people that don't speak arcade stick is that if you're like me and you say, hey, I do kind of have some very specific arcade stick needs that I would like to have met by replacing the joystick, then you have to deal with desoldering and either wiring a 5-pin harness into the supplied 8-pin connector or soldering a 5-pin harness to the solder points that they just left with nothing attached to them. Because they've got the 5-pin harness spot on the PCB in the arcade stick, but there's no connector there. They just didn't solder one on. So I do kind of... Also, to open it, it's not Phillips. It's T10 Torx bits in the bottom. So I for being a stick that is literally sold as, please mod this, this is ultra moddable, it doesn't fit like half the sticks that I've tried to price for it. It's hard to open, and it's difficult to replace the stick. It's out of the 3 sticks I own, it's by far the hardest one to work in so far. Which is really frustrating for people like me that do say, no, yes, I want this stick for my shmups and this one for my fighting games, and they're going to have their own joysticks and yada, yada, yada. But made doubly frustrating because they seem to want to sell it as an ultra-moddable device, and that is patently false, going by the way they've constructed it. All that said, I love the stick. I mean, the because you were asking me, like, would this be the stick you recommend to someone? Because of course I'm in chat bitching for an hour and a half about it as I'm dealing with it.
You
were like,
you had just gotten the stick and you were already like, let me tell you about the solder points. And I was like, well, how? But can I play the Dig Dug?
So, well, and you were like, would you still recommend it with all these complaints? And I was like, yeah, if you're the kind of guy that's like, hey, I just want an arcade stick.
Yeah.
100%, it's the one to go for. It's versatile. It's wireless. It seems to have a reasonable amount of latency. It's attractive. I love that the acrylic around the buttons does not extend all the way to the bottom, so you're not resting your sweaty palm on that like acrylic plexiglass kind of stuff. It's very nice. It's very versatile. But if you're the kind of person that's like, oh yeah, I like to open all my sticks up and customize them and put custom art on them and stuff, then I wouldn't.
There's not even a place on this for custom art.
No, not really. No.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would say look elsewhere, because if you're the kind of person that does that to sticks anyway, you're probably comfortable doing all of these things. But I would say, hey, be aware going into it that it's going to be more work to get this stick where you want it than it is like a Hori stick or one of the Razor sticks or something, which are the other ones I own.
Okay.
And it just feels like I talked for a long time about solder points now. So that's the theme of this episode. Justin talks for too long about very technical, specific things. We're off to a great start. But this is your first arcade stick, like really, that you've owned in your adult life.
Oh, this is the first one that I've bought since the Sega Saturn, I guess.
Yeah. Because you've been talking for a long time, like I guess tangentially interested in one for the purpose of playing old arcade games.
Yeah, exclusively for old arcade games, basically. So I did. The first thing I did was I plugged it into my RetroPie, and I played some of the games that I had on there, and that it felt nice. It was a little weird getting used to it, just because of how the buttons are laid out. The OK button is the second from the left on the bottom row.
Oh, are you in Switch mode?
No, that was in Xbox mode.
It's the second from the... Oh, yeah. So
because the RetroPie still looks
at... bottom row is A, B, right trigger, left trigger.
Right. And the last time that I used an arcade stick, it wasn't laid out like that. So it took some getting used to that.
Yeah.
Then I had to remember how to remap buttons in RetroArch on my RetroPie, because I hadn't done that in a while. So the first emulator I decided to do that on was Neo Geo, because I felt like the layout of the buttons on here was conducive to that.
Yeah.
So I booted up Neo Geo and immediately went for the best, most prolific Neo Geo games, Neo Bomberman and Puzzle Bobble 2.
Of course.
And of course Money Idol Exchanger. I had to get that in there too. And no, it was great. It felt like what I would remember from an arcade, which again, I'm not like a super arcade stick connoisseur, so I don't know if it's accurate in any way, but it felt good. Yeah. And then I only went backwards from there. I went to older games. I went over to my PC and I plugged it in. First, I tried to plug it into my Xbox One and was very sad that it would not accept that, because I wanted to try some Radiant Silvergun on it, which I could have just plugged it into my Xbox 360 and played it that way, but I didn't. But I did try it out on my PC and played some older arcade games, and it felt right. It felt nice. I don't think that I would use it for anything more modern than that or anything more technical than that, because I still prefer a D-pad most of the time. Right. But it's nice for the really old stuff.
Yeah, it's for me, like a lot of arcade games, I don't require an arcade stick. And even fighting games, I like an arcade stick, but I don't really require one. But for some reason, arcade puzzle games, so specifically your Money Idol Exchanger, your Puzzle Bobble, your Magical Drop, they feel wrong with a controller. I don't know why that is. It's because I never played them in the arcade ever. None of them. Never have even seen one in an arcade. But for some reason, there's something with the sort of like flow-like state you get into with a puzzle game and slapping big giant arcade controls around that's like extra satisfying, you know? I'm sure there's some weird psychology going on there that I can't explain. But it does work. I do like the button layout on this one. This uses I think it's a Vuelix layout. It's the same one Taito used on their arcade machines with so you've got 8 buttons, and the first 2 on the left side are kind of lowered, and then the rest are sort of all in line. The remaining 6 are in 2 rows, all lined up with each other.
I thought it just looked like 2 rows of Neo Geo buttons, but that could just be that I never really looked at the button layouts that closely.
Yeah, well, I mean, like physically how they're set up, but yeah, you'll see them differently. Where there's some of them where the 2 buttons on either end are lower, and the 4 buttons in the middle are a little higher. There's different setups. This is kind of the has become the standard. All my sticks have this same. I'm pretty sure it's the Vuelix layout.
I don't know.
But I've been enjoying it a lot. It's a good stick. I had my mandatory bitching session about it, but it is a good stick. I am enjoying it. I have also been playing Darius Burst Chronicles Savior EX Turbo Hyper Fighting Edition. I don't remember the whole name of the game.
Darius Burst Chronicles Saviors. I think that's
there it is.
I think that's the proper title, but then they added EX
to
the recent version of it.
Which Saturn you bought for me as a Christmas present, and then I went, well, I already own the game, so I guess I have to buy all the DLC for it.
That's normal.
And let me tell you, it's a fun game without the DLC. It's a very fun shmup. But the DLC is and I never recommend DLC for games. It's fantastic. It's like a Smash Brothers for shmups. So you've got all these different levels, and you get to play as different ships and characters from other shmups with their correct controls and power-up systems or whatever they have.
Right.
And specially designed levels.
Yeah, levels with their correct soundtracks.
Yeah, and very often heavily remixed. Like they have an Opa Opa ship that you can play as with a power-up system, and they have, as far as I can tell, new remixes from Fantasy Zone.
My only complaint about Opa Opa on there is when you go down to the bottom to collect coins, he doesn't have his little feet stick out.
Yeah,
it's very sad.
Opa Opa, compared to other ships in the DLC, feels dramatically underpowered. The Battle Garaga ships and the Dodonpachi ships feel really overpowered for a Darius game.
Right.
But man, what that combined with the new arcade stick has just been a real treat.
Nice.
I was talking to someone in the chat today saying, like, I don't know that I recommend Darius Burst on PC with the price point, because I think the game with the DLC is like over $60.
Yeah.
But
even just the DLC, if it's priced normally, is over $60.
Yeah.
And the game itself, I think, is normally 40 or 60. I don't remember.
Yeah. So I can't recommend it on price point because that's just an insane amount of money for a video game. Well, I mean, really, not anymore. Not in the PS5 era where everything's $70.
Right.
But that's a lot of money for me to pay for a shmup.
Yeah.
But man, if you can, I'd say if you can get the whole DLC package in the game for like $50 or under, it's great. What a great package. What a lot of fun.
So I had bought the game on PS4 several years ago. I mentioned it on the show because I enjoyed it. And I especially enjoy that it supports the double widescreen monitor view.
Yeah.
In case you want to emulate the arcade Darius experience. I tried to buy the DLC from my PS4 and Sony fought with me and didn't want me to buy it. So instead, I pirated it on my Vita.
Thanks, Sony.
That was much easier than installing it on and purchasing it on my PS4, and it works great. So if you already have a Vita hacked, it's worth checking the game out to see if you want to spend money on it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's just real cool. It's just honestly, it's just fun seeing all these other ships from different shmups that I enjoy in Darius.
Yeah,
because the levels are they're just Darius.
Yeah,
levels.
they're very Darius-y.
But you're like, oh, look, it's Opa Opa fighting a giant robot fish. Like, it's fun. Although I guess that wouldn't be out of the ordinary for Opa.
No, that's not really out of his wheelhouse.
Let's knock some news out.
I was going to mention on my week, I did finish the new Spider-Man.
No, you're not allowed.
Oh, my bad.
Mention that. How the Miles Morales edition. I was under the impression that it wasn't a new game as much as it was like Spider-Man 1.5.
It definitely feels like that.
Okay.
They are advertising it like a new game, and they are charging $50 for it.
Of course.
So
it's a discount title is what you're saying.
That's how they're advertising it, yes.
It hurts me even to make that joke.
No, it plays nearly identically to the last one, which I think I mentioned last time on the show. But I did finish it since then. And having finished the game, it plays nearly identically to the last one, only shorter. I think I maybe put in 8 hours, and I finished all of the side quests and side missions on the standard difficulty. I wasn't about to jump up from there. But what really got me was the ending credit sequence. Just the credits, just names scrolling up the screen, not like videos playing or anything like that. Just names scrolling on the screen took 30 minutes.
Oh my gosh, were they scrolling that slow?
No, they were going at a pretty good clip. So there was a ton of people they had to credit for it, which almost makes me feel bad having paid $50 for it, despite the fact that I think that might have been too much for somebody who already owns the original. But I almost feel bad just because if I divided my $50 between all of the people in 30 minutes of credits, nobody gets a penny.
Well, Saturn, here's the thing about big budget video games.
Most of that money
they don't get a penny anyway.
Goes to the first 10 people listed.
They already got paid to make it. Now they're done. They're not getting any of your sales revenue.
Yeah. It is. That was just the most ludicrously long credit sequence I've ever had, so I had to mention that.
You could have watched half of a Kojima cutscene in the time. It's ridiculous.
Almost.
Let's knock some news out.
Yes, sir.
First up, GameStop announces plans to close over 1,000 stores by March. Cue the people singing the death of GameStop, which probably won't happen for several years yet.
By my math, that means that they will still have 999,000 stores in the U.S.
For anyone that will be losing their job from that,
that's obviously very tragic.
That's terrible, but man, fuck GameStop.
Yeah, as a company,
please
they can eat all the
please
dicks.
shut your company down so that regular game stores can come back. Please,
seriously.
Nintendo Switch is the top-selling console in November. 1.3 million plus units sold.
Dang.
That's a lot. That's very good.
Especially considering that's the month that 2 new consoles came out.
Well, they sold all 15 of those, and all that's left was the Switch, and people had to buy something for
they
Christmas.
sold more than 15, just that was how many the scalpers didn't get.
EA announces surprise bid for Codemasters, outbidding Take-Two at the last minute. Plans expected to be finalized in Q1 2021 at an estimated value of $1.2 billion. That's in US dollars, which is 14% higher than Take-Two's offer. I don't really care for either of them to have anything, really.
Yeah.
But still interesting.
It is weird because Codemasters is one of the last big companies that does racing simulators.
I was going to say, what do they even make these days?
Racing games mostly, almost exclusively racing games. They make some arcade style and mostly simulators. And
why would EA want them except to eliminate competition?
I think it's to eliminate competition. That's my theory.
Oh, so they'll bring them in on Need for Speed and then...
Yeah, they might still put out an occasional dirt game or whatever it is.
Oh, EA puts out all right.
Yeah.
CD Projekt stock drops 29% after the Cyberpunk launch. I will say that I've talked so much about Cyberpunk in Discord in the last couple of weeks that I don't even care to spend much time talking about them here.
Right. But
it's in the news, so I'm just going to fire through the bullet points of what CD Projekt has been going through.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk came out. It's a pretty good game.
Yeah.
And
we mentioned last time that it was performing poorly at launch.
Yeah, I was playing it since my last report, because on the last show, I believe I said I was playing it. I was having a good time with it, and I continue to have a good time with it. And then I started encountering lots of problems, and I put the game down, and then they released a 30 gigabyte update, and it fixed a lot of my problems.
Nice.
So I picked it back up, but by then my excitement had kind of worn off, so it's just kind of languished away. I'll probably return to it at some point. CD Projekt Red offered refunds to any players on PS4, but later walked that offer back when it was clear that Sony wasn't making exceptions. Sony and Microsoft both later announced offers to refund digital purchases, and then Sony removed the game from sale on PlayStation Network.
And I think that's the first time that they've removed a commercial product from sale.
Yeah, as far as we assume it's because of the refund fiasco.
Right.
But I don't believe they actually stated anything. No. Microsoft added a disclaimer that the game performs poorly on Xbox One consoles.
Which, that's a weird disclaimer for the Xbox One version of the game.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
After PC players have noticed save files getting corrupted, GOG and CDPR support advised that players, quote, keep a lower amount of items to circumvent a bug that will irreversibly corrupt your save file if I believe if the save file reaches over 8 megabytes in size.
That's good. That's normal, right?
And then CD Projekt in non-Cyberpunk news, the publishers of Taiwanese horror game Devotion that was previously removed from Steam due to what people said was angry gamers, but was probably more pressure from the Chinese government.
It was definitely pressure from the Chinese government.
Announced that their game would be coming to GOG, only to have GOG issue a tweet that it would not be released due to, quote, many messages from gamers. So CD Projekt has drugged CD Projekt through the mud the last few weeks. And I don't know what CD Projekt's problem with CD Projekt is, but they need to get over it because this feud has gone on for too long.
It's gotten ugly. And
the fact that all of this drama over a product that they are developing, publishing, and distributing and then having issues with their platform that they exclusively own. It's all the same company.
Yeah.
You would think this was a whole bunch of companies fighting with each other. It's just CD Projekt fucking everything up.
Now, granted, Sony and Microsoft did get involved here.
They did, but only because CD Projekt was like, oh yeah, they'll fix your thing. And then they were like, no, we won't.
Right. It was a very, very bizarre situation. And I feel really bad for the people that work at CD Projekt, especially the people that work at CD Projekt Red, because they are likely going to be working on fixing Cyberpunk for months and months and months, possibly in extended crunch after the game has released,
and after the developer explicitly stated that they will not be crunching employees.
Well, they already did. Game. So, and that was after several delays.
So it's not a fun situation.
No.
I mean, obviously, I feel for the people that are actually the developers,
right?
Because they're the ones that are going to get the brunt of the complaints, I imagine.
And from what I've heard, they made a very good game. Whether or not
the game's fun. It's a fun game.
Yeah, so they did a fine job. It's just that I feel like maybe they were held up to unrealistic expectations by their management.
Exactly.
That led them to a very unfortunate situation.
And they've come out themselves, and developers within CD Projekt have come out and been like, hey, this was executive decisions that caused this whole avalanche of problems.
Ugh.
So credit where credit is due. It's the executives' fault, not the people making the game.
Right.
Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo issued a rare joint press announcement that they are committing to creating a safer online gaming environment by doing things. They're definitely going to make it safer.
What are they going to do?
Safer. They're going to release a video telling you not to be unsafe online.
Don't do the unsafe. No, they mentioned that they were going to work with parents.
Oh, all of them?
All of the parents. They didn't
just going to go to the National Parenting Committee,
right? The International Parenting Committee.
Oh, right.
No, they didn't.
The International House of Parenting Committees.
They didn't go into any specifics at all. They were just like, we're going to work with parents and parents groups and retailers, and we're going to make it safer for online.
Basically, it was yet another constantly ongoing hand-waving PR moment to offset any potential future fingers that may be pointed at them.
Yes.
Is what it really was.
But, hey, they worked together for this hand wave. That's very impressive.
Did it. 5 more games added to Nintendo Switch Online. NES got Nightshade. Thanks.
Okay.
Super NES got Donkey Kong Country 3, Ignition Factor, Tough Enough, and Super Valis 4.
Aside from Donkey Kong Country 3... which of those were you most looking forward to?
Yeah. I've heard of 2 of those games.
I played Valis 4.
Donkey Kong Country 3. Yeah, I think I might have for our... Did we do a Valis show?
We did do a Valis episode.
Man, we've done too many shows. I don't even remember what we've done.
But we covered the TurboGrafx versions that were better. Japan got different games. They got Smash Ping Pong for Famicom. And they got Kunio-kun Dodgeball for Super Famicom, and Sugoi Hebereki for Super Famicom, and then also the Ignition Factor in Donkey Kong Country 3.
And finally, Yacht Club Games announces Cyber Shadow, an upcoming retro game with heavy Ninja Gaiden and Shinobi influences. I thought this had been announced previously, but we just didn't see much of it.
Maybe, but it was shown off at the Indie World that Nintendo put out.
That looks good. I'm a little trepidatious to say things like, "Oh yeah, I like that company and the stuff they put out. I'll buy their product just based on that," because that's what I used to say about CD Projekt Red. So I'm not going to say that, but I want everyone to know that I would say that. If I wasn't scared, I would jinx it.
Yeah. Now, they did mention that the Switch version of Cyber Shadow will support Shovel Knight Amiibo.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, that's
really
neat.
Need to get my Shovel Knight Amiibos.
I've got the original Shovel Knight Amiibo that came out back in the Wii U era, but I didn't get any of the others.
In the dark days.
In the dark ages.
Let's get into the topic at hand this week. We're talking Shining Force, the legacy of great intention.
The legacy
that's not
of
me hyping
great
it.
Subtitle.
That's the name of the game. That's the full. In case you didn't know, Shining Force is legacy of great intention until they changed it for the other versions.
Yeah, the
of the game.
Game Boy version changed that.
As far as synopsis, Shining Force is a strategy RPG developed by Climax Entertainment in conjunction with Sonic Software Planning for the Sega Genesis, featuring centaurs and a hamster.
Yes.
Centaurs plural, hamster singular is just the one hamster that I've found in the game. If there's more, I didn't see them.
Beast yogurt.
It released in Japan on March 20th, 1992, North America in July of 93, and in European territories in July of 93. So later game for the system.
Yeah. But not not even the latest game in this series for the system.
No. As far as first encounters, I've been kind of tangentially aware of Shining Force for a while now, but I just kind of always thought of it as that knockoff Fire Emblem because I was an ill-informed Nintendo fan, and I have since begun changing my ways. But for years, it was just like, oh, that's Sega's Fire Emblem that nobody liked as much.
What?
That was what it was in my head. So yeah, I was that guy. Yeah. I was that guy that you would argue with if you encountered him in the wild.
Yes. No, I had first played Shining Force back when it was still a newish release. I had rented it back then, and I thought it was really super neat and really enjoyed it. And of course, Fire Emblem hadn't come out over here, and I don't even remember seeing any real coverage of Fire Emblem in magazines at that time. So I was not aware if it was a knockoff in any way. I thought that this was a wholly original concept and was like, this is crazy new kind of gameplay. It's like Military Madness, but with centaurs. We need more of this in video games.
You were the only kid in America saying this is like Military Madness. I want you to know that you were the only child in North America. Everyone else would have gone, what is Military Madness? And you would have gone, it's a TurboGrafx game, and they would have gone, it's a what? Is exactly how that would have.
That's true. I even the other person that I knew with the TurboGrafx, whenever I'd mention Military Madness, they'd say, that sounds lame. So
that sounds like a condition you get, is what it sounds like. I got the Military Madness.
I got some pills to deal with my Military Madness.
Listener feedback. Rygar Starkong writes in, I literally just started playing Shining Force on the Genesis Collection on PS4 because Justin was talking about it, and let's be honest, centaurs are freaking awesome.
That's true.
I agree. Anyway, I'm only like an hour in because I'm psychotic and also playing Cold Steel 1 on PlayStation Now because Saturn really sold me on the series in earlier episodes.
That's a good game.
Possibly through the use of subliminal messaging because I have also been craving Coke Zero.
That's true. We are...
Good luck. Saturn can perpetually never find the stuff.
No, I can find regular Coke Zero. It's the cherry Coke Zero that's just fucking vanished. I'm so angry. Anyway.
I didn't mean to bring up these past demons.
I'm sorry.
You struggle with. One day they'll get a cherry Coke Zero patch that you can wear and just help wean you off of the stuff. You'd probably be the guy that wore the patch and still drank the soda.
Oh, yeah. I definitely would.
Be that. I got 2 patches. Timer writes in, please go out of your way to read the 6-issue comic from the UK in which the Shining Force games are revealed to take place on a post-apocalyptic Earth. They're kind of revealed to be that in the game, but we'll talk about that. And the cast of the game, centaurs included, go off on adventures to find and defuse a nuclear bomb. In conclusion, this series is significantly better than Fire Emblem.
Now I have to go find this comic series.
I unfortunately did not have time to read the comic series. Someone kindly linked to it, and it's on my list of things I want to read now, but I did not have time. With Christmas,
you'll have to send me that link as well, because I need that now.
Let's talk development.
Yes, sir.
Shining Force was developed by Climax Entertainment and Sonic Software Planning. And just so you know, the Sonic has an exclamation point, so I think I'm supposed to yell it.
Yeah. Also, just so people are aware, Sonic Software Planning, if you're not familiar with them, they are a planning studio that developed Zero Sonic software titles.
It's just a clever nickname.
Yes.
This is my studio, Mario and Pokemon Development Studios.
What did you make? Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing.
Climax also developed the first game, Shining in the Darkness, but it was a dungeon crawler. They were working on an action RPG as a third game in the franchise, but that later became known as Landstalker.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the Climax was just interested in every game in the franchise being a completely different genre at that point.
Yeah, which to be fair, was kind of a theme of a lot of games in the late 80s and early 90s era, when you started seeing sequels happening and companies going, well, we can't just make the same gameplay twice.
Well, by the time Shining Force came around, most companies had decided that was okay. Like,
yeah, I guess being 93. I forget it was so late. I'm thinking like 90, 92.
No, this was a few years into the Genesis.
Yeah. And obviously they're not to be confused with Climax Studios, which are different.
Yeah, Climax Studios was the British company that made the Silent Hill games. They're very different.
Sonic Software Planning is more likely recognized by their later name, Camelot Software Planning.
Right.
Responsible for all the Shining Force games, Mario Golf, Tennis, Golden Sun, etc.
All the early Shining Force games.
Right. Yeah. And Horiyuki Takahashi, the president of Camelot, stated in a 2010 interview with Games TM that Sega offered them, quote, the bare minimum funding to out-of-house developers.
I believe that.
And he goes on to state that despite the success of Shining in the Darkness, Sega still wouldn't increase funding for their sequel, Shining Force. And he you could tell there's some bad blood there. He was even in 2010 still a little upset with the amount of funding that Sega was willing to dish out.
It was a real bloody breakup after Shining Force 3 between Camelot and Sega. That did not end well.
And thankfully, Camelot went on to be kind of a premier Nintendo developer.
Yeah, they basically have been a second-party Nintendo developer for many years now, mostly working on Mario sports franchises.
And for the longest time, I just assumed that they were internal first-party Nintendo. They just had some weird name for some weird reason.
Also, Camelot invented Waluigi.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Think about that.
They're the ones responsible, huh?
Centaurs and Waluigi, that's their legacy.
Finally, I have a direction for my hatred. But let's talk about the game itself.
Yeah.
Graphics and sound-wise, it was composed by Masahiko Yoshimura, who did the previous game. And I want to talk about the music because I don't know if it's because I just played so many hours of the game, but I like the soundtrack. The music is very serviceable, but not exactly stand out. It's not like iconic tracks from Shining Force.
I disagree. I love the soundtrack. I thought it was great. It was one of the few. It was one of the few Sega soundtracks that I was willing to go out and find MIDIs for back in the day.
I don't dislike it. It's the lack of variety for me, I think.
That's
because
fair. Especially if you've got a long battle going on.
Being a slow-paced game like this, I would often. My Genesis Mini stayed on for days at a time, just on.
Hopefully, you didn't leave the TV on playing the music for days at a time.
Well, so if in the middle of my day, whenever I do research for games like this that are slow-paced, I will generally pull them up in the morning and just leave them up all day long as I go about my daily business. So as I take a break to make lunch for my kid or clean the house or cook dinner or go do laundry or whatever. And sometimes I will go back to the menu or turn the TV off. But sometimes it's just like my kid hollers and I have to jump up and I run in there and then I'm like, oh, it's time for lunch. And events begin chaining into other events. And I realize I've been listening to the town theme in Shining Force for 2.5 solid hours. And I not too long ago connected my TV up to my very nice stereo in a moment of lucidity and going, why do I not have this hooked up?
Right.
So it played it very loud and on very nice speakers. And so I think it was just that I just got tired of it.
You know, I can't blame you for that. That's well, I can kind of blame you for it. I can blame you for setting yourself up in the situation.
Explicitly blame me for it, yes.
But I can't blame you for the outcome of it. I can understand how that would start to wear on you.
So I like it, but it's not incredible to me. It's just the lack of variety. There's like, here's the one town theme, here's the one battle theme. That's
I do often complain about Genesis or Mega Drive music because a lot of composers for the Genesis either came from European microcomputers or things like the Amiga, or they came from Nintendo's consoles like the NES and the Super NES. And for some reason,
know how to work on Genesis.
Yeah, when they composed stuff for the Genesis, it always sounded like farts. Just
very farty.
Yeah, yes. It was just hammering you with fart noises. But a lot of Sega's internal development and some of the other Japanese developers on the console were able to put out some really great music. And I always felt that Shining Force and Shining Force 2 were some of the best examples of some of that like great Genesis music that didn't sound like farts.
Can that be the subtitle of our show? Retro Warriors hammering you with farts? We put a colon in that.
Well, that has to be.
Graphically, for the most part, the game is again, I would say serviceable. It looks fine, except for the battle backdrops. They're very good.
Yeah.
Very good sprite work. Very good battle background. So it's that kind of Fire Emblem thing where you go into a battle and it zooms you into the battle and shows you a little backdrop. And those are really cool. And there's a ton of them. They have one for every single different possible environment. Sometimes multiple ones on the same battlefield. It really does add a lot to the immersion in the game. And
that is one of my few issues that I have with the game, and it's not even a real issue. It's a dumb thing. But I rented Shining Force back when it came out, but I didn't buy it until after I already owned Shining Force 2. And so I had played a ton of Shining Force 2 and then went back to finish Shining Force 1. And Shining Force 1, and now I'm trying to go from memory because it's been a little bit, but it'll show your character and then it like pans the camera to a different place with the enemy, right?
No, you see both of the same.
Oh, you do? Okay, then never mind. Then my complaint is the opposite direction. Shining Force 2 is my problem because I always feel dizzy when it pans over to the other character.
Yeah. So. There is some motion in the camera whenever it's coming in, but it's just sprites sliding in, really.
Right, but it shows them both at the same time, right?
To my memory, and I played many hours of it last week, I feel like you saw them both at the same time.
Then I have that complaint about Shining Force 2 then.
Or I just don't remember it ever happening, and it happened for 20 hours while I played the game.
Right. But that was the one thing that bothered me between the two was it would show the hero, and then it would pan over to the enemy to show them take damage, and that always made me kind of dizzy.
Yeah.
Coming from
so graphically and sound wise, it's decent. It's not especially for being a later game. It's not the most impressive thing in the world.
I would consider it a middle of the library game.
I'd say that for sure, most definitely. Like as far as other games in 1993 in America, it's not going to blow anyone's socks off.
Well, I was saying like middle age wise. Like I wouldn't say it's a later game. It's a middle of the console's lifespan game.
Well, I mean, obviously the Genesis was sold until like 2004. I mean, like true. it's active lifespan.
Right, but yeah, like,
when it was a big deal.
Right, yeah, but games were still being released for it as late as like 95, 96. So there was there was still some time to
go. Let's talk story.
Yeah.
Shining Force is about Max and his friends from Gardenia who are on a quest to stop Kain and King Ramladu. That's how they spell it.
I love your pronunciation there. I don't know if it's wrong, but I love it.
After an attack destroys most of their home kingdom of Gardenia, Max begins recruiting friends and new allies into the Shining Force. You can guess the basic gist of the game from there.
Yeah, and you get a lot of party members that you can recruit.
Oh, a ton. I was really not expecting as many as there were.
Yeah.
Eventually, we learn that the bad guys are being manipulated by Dark Soul, who is attempting to resurrect a dark dragon in Fire Emblem fashion. I mean, we hadn't even seen a Fire Emblem in America by the time Shining Force had come out, but Japan
not
had
for
seen
a decade. No,
many Fire Emblems at this point, hadn't they?
Oh yeah, they were already up to like 4 or 5 by this point.
Dark Souls minions begin resurrecting ancient artifacts, which are in fact little sci-fi things that shoot laser beams and stuff. So it does have a little bit of a sort of sci-fi bend to it. And when as our listener read and said, I felt like in the game it very much implied that this is a post-apocalyptic fantasy world.
Right. Yeah, because you end up encountering what they refer to as ruins that are very clearly futuristic technology stuff.
For sure. Eventually Kain, one of the main bad guys, is revealed to be Max's brother.
Oh, no.
And I think that was exclusive to the GBA version because I don't remember any dialogue in the Genesis version saying that they were brothers. I
haven't played the Genesis version in a very long time, so I can't speak to that.
I was playing the Genesis version, and all of a sudden, you defeat Kain, and he's like, oh, I guess we're friends now. We'll unlock this sacred door together that needs 2 heroes. And you're like, all right, cool, Kain's a good guy now. All right, whatever.
It could also just be a bad translation, though.
It could be, because I'm playing it, and then that was right about the time that I switched to the GBA version to see the differences. So I was in Chapter 6, and I jumped over, and the battle opens, and Max is like, oh, Kain is my brother. I'm so dark and edgy, because it has extra dialogue. Yeah. And I was like, he's what? Huh? What are you talking about? So yeah, they're brothers. Cue the dramatic music.
Right.
Eventually, Max forges a magical sword, Chaos Breaker, to destroy the bad guys, and everyone is happy and stuff. And there are centaurs,
and
which is the most important story section.
Also, Yogurt.
There are centaurs. Also, there is Yogurt the hamster.
Yes, he is very important.
Let's talk gameplay.
Yeah.
It is kind of the gameplay itself is what I would call sort of bog standard, no frills strategy RPG.
Right.
And I mean that in a kind way.
Yeah.
Because if this game came out today, it would be completely unimpressive.
Right.
But for the time in 1992/93, depending on territory, this was, I think, still kind of some foundation setting in the genre that we didn't have yet.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it broke any boundaries in that regard, but it definitely was helping solidify a genre.
Yeah, and
when it came out,
and it was a genre that was underrepresented on both sides.
Still
of the
is,
ocean.
in my opinion.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But it was especially still underrepresented then. You basically had Fire Emblem, and then this.
Yeah. There are melee and ranged units, flying and ground units, and mages and healers with your basic menagerie of magical abilities. But what I really like about it is that between the various combat stages, the game operates very much like a just bare bones JRPG.
Yeah.
So whereas Fire Emblem is basically story, cutscenes with story that lead directly into battles that lead into more cutscenes with story. And then you have later games like Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre and stuff that you move around on a map, but you're not really in a world.
Right.
This is straight up like top-down JRPG. You're walking around a town, opening chests, talking to people, finding little secrets around corners, and then you walk out of town and bam, suddenly the overworld is your battlefield.
Yes. And I absolutely love it. I love how you actually get to spend time in the towns. It makes it feel like it's more interactive than just going through a menu in Final Fantasy Tactics or Tactics Ogre.
Oh yeah, and it's got everything: item shops, recruitable characters.
Yep.
The storyline is very bare bones, but there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of little side stories and stuff. It does make you feel much more connected to the game world without having to just shove constant story down your throat. Fire Emblem, and sometimes that's nice to not just be like, okay, this guy's that guy's second cousin, and they came from this town, but they're going over here, but the town is the same name as the one bad guy except for one letter. So, and you get in this weird thing. This is just like, here's the bad guys, and your connection to the game is through you feeling like you're actually wandering around in a world more so than you having to memorize a large cast of complicated characters, which I like.
One thing that has always stuck out with the Shining Force games for me, and the Shining series, I suppose, was how Climax would always use those icons to represent your options in any menu. So instead of it just being a text box with yes and no, you would have the little person nodding their head or the little person shaking their head, and it was animated whenever you would hover over it. And I've always thought that was, one, completely adorable, and two, really made it stand out against other games from that era, because even as late as the Genesis and Super Nintendo, we were still just seeing text boxes. Like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI, which are later-ish games on the Super NES, still just use text boxes to represent everything. And it made Shining Force feel different. It gave it a different feel to interacting with even just basic menus.
It very much feels like it has more character and more heart,
and more charm,
for lack of a better term. Charm. That's probably I like that better than what I said. Pablo, edit in what Saturn said over what I said. It has charm,
yes,
which is something that you often find lacking from this genre. That's very tactical, that's very dry often. This is like, oh, there's a hamster and a centaur, and they're going to go over here and click on the shaky head and fight a wizard. Like, it feels like it's having fun.
Right, yeah. Whereas a lot of strategy games from this era, especially if you look at like Koei's strategy games, were very expecting some dude with a pegboard with strings tied up everywhere to determine what the best possible answer is. And this game just throws you a hamster with a magic helmet on.
Sometimes when I play early enough Koei games, I think I've accidentally opened Excel.
You have, actually. It's built into the game.
Combat itself is quite slow. There are full cut-ins for every attack that you can't disable.
That's true.
Many of the battlefields are very large, which leads to a lot of turns of just you inching forward and the enemy inching forward, and you cannot skip enemy turns. So, this enemy over here who's not even activated yet and is literally going to do nothing until you're right next to him, every round we're going to zoom over to him, sit on him for a second, and go, nope, no movement here, go to the next guy. And it does feel very slow.
Yeah, it was desperately in need of a fast-forward button.
Thankfully, modern emulators have fast forward buttons, especially if you're playing in the Genesis Classics collection. I believe that has a fast forward. I know it has a rewind. But now I'm not sure if it has a fast forward. If it does, use it. I do also love that moves can be taken back as long as the character in question has not committed to an action.
Yes.
Which is a huge boon for accessibility.
Right.
There's nothing more frustrating in tactical games than moving a character and before you actually finish their turn going, oh, no, wait, I need to do this, or my range is off, or, oh, I misjudged those squares. I needed to be one forward or one to the left. That's not a problem here.
Right.
Because until you have to complete your entire action for the turn before it stops you.
Yes. Which is so nice.
Even later games like Final Fantasy Tactics feels like it locks you into actions unnecessarily. And
all of Quest games do that. It's really frustrating. Shining Force as a whole just feels more forgiving than a lot of its contemporaries.
Oh, most definitely. Especially, and this just leads right into the difficulty of the game. The difficulty is way more manageable than something like Fire Emblem, simply by virtue of the fact that your characters can be resurrected in town. Yes. There is no permadeath in Shining Force.
And it's just, 10 gold per level, I think, if I remember right?
It never got exorbitantally expensive for me. I always had way more money than I ever needed.
That's because you weren't promoting your characters.
I learned that. But we'll talk about that later. But this does mean things like critical hits or tactical mistakes aren't game ending, and they're not overwhelmingly punishing.
Right.
And sometimes you get into battles where you end up with like one or two guys left, and you're just scraping out that victory. And that's a level of excitement that Shining Force can give you that games like Fire Emblem cannot. Because if that happened in Fire Emblem, you'd be like, oh, fuck this, I'm restarting.
Right.
Like 9 guys die.
Yeah.
And this really is the main gameplay that drew me in. It feels like, and I know I keep comparing to Fire Emblem. I know that big Shining Force fans probably feel like that's an affront to their personal tastes, and I know it is.
It is,
but it's the most direct comparison.
Right.
That's where I'm coming from. I guess is what I'm trying to say. It feels like Fire Emblem with JRPG towns and reasonable difficulty.
Yeah.
Which really makes up for the game's pretty much glacial moment-to-moment gameplay and story pacing. The game is just very slow. Even just walking around towns sometimes feels so slow as to be fussy.
And it's been a long time since I've played it, even this version, but I feel like the GBA version ran a little bit faster than the Genesis version.
It feels that way. Yeah. I cannot verifiably say that, but it may just be that there's more animation, more stuff happening, more things to see, so you don't notice it as much. Facing and flanking have no effect.
Right.
Although that I would say that wasn't maybe necessarily expected in SRPGs of this era.
Yeah, it hadn't been set in stone yet.
Terrain has various effects, but they aren't programmed properly in the Genesis version.
Yeah.
So I don't believe they do anything in practice.
But I still act like they do when I'm making decisions. Of course I do.
There are 30 recruitable characters, some of which are mandatory, others are optional, and the cast of characters is you've got like wolf people, centaurs, steampunk armadillos, a hamster. I just wrote a jetpack man. Yeah. I think there's more than one jetpack man. There's a tank. One of them's just a tank. He just is a tank.
Of the characters that you played, who was your least favorite?
You know what? Honest to goodness, I felt a real genuine connection to all of the characters because they were all unique. They all had a lot of charm. Even my favorite were the centaurs. For people that haven't picked up on it, I really like centaurs. They're awesome. I agree with our listener right in. They're great.
When I introduced this game to a friend of mine in the late 90s, once he had enough characters, he rolled a pure centaur party, just like only centaurs all the time.
That very much more forgiving difficulty makes it possible to do weird stuff and get weird with your party lineup. But even the centaurs, in a strategy RPG, I expect similar classes to basically be interchangeably identical with maybe some small stat differences. Every one of them has their own personality, their own story, their own individual character portrait that are different. They do feel like different characters, even though in combat they're effectively all the same.
They're just centaurs.
They're just centaurs. So I really did like all of them. Even the characters I didn't use, I'd be like, oh man, they're cool. I'm not going to use them because I don't need that in my lineup right now. But man, what a cool character. They can also be upgraded, which I didn't know until chapter 7 of 8.
Yeah, it was pretty great. You would load it up as somebody else's save file, right?
When I switched to the GBA version, I was like, well, I'll just load up a save file that's in the same spot of the game as me so that I can keep going from there to see how the GBA version plays. And I was like, what the fuck? What are these classes? Why are their levels so much lower than mine? So I had just had the original classes way high leveled. It's crazy high levels. You can upgrade them.
Yes. At level 10, you can promote your characters.
And yeah, so do that because it's useful. Missed units are unable to be obtained after being missed. And some of the units are kind of frustratingly easy to miss. It's things like, oh, yes, you had dialogue with that guy, but did you have the dialogue the last time you saw him? Because you have to have both dialogue scenes for him to be recruitable or whatever. Yeah. So in like, I missed the very first character you actually go recruit is a dwarf. I forget his name because I didn't have him because I forgot to go talk to him. I like when you encounter him in the beginning of the game and I'm like, he seems recruitable. I'll come back to him. And I forgot. And then I couldn't go back to that town.
Right.
So it's easy to miss characters.
Yeah.
So if that bothers you, play it with a guide.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, and honestly it shouldn't because 30 characters and you only use, I think, was it 12?
I think 12 is the max in a battle.
So even if you have all of them, you're not even using half of them.
Yeah.
So honestly, in most of the characters, there are kind of multiples. You get multiple mages, multiple healers, multiple centaurs. There are a couple of specifics like the Wolfman, what's his name? Xylo. The Tank Man, I forget his name.
There's a robot
Tank Man
at the end.
So yeah, the other big pain that I had with the game is inventory management, which I would say is easily the game's biggest issue.
Yeah, because they can only hold 4 items.
Yeah, each character has 4 item slots, and that includes equipped items. So if your character has a ring equipped and a sword equipped, and you have them holding a healing herb, they've got 1 open slot.
Right.
And if your main character's inventory is full, you cannot pick up new items.
Right.
At all. It just goes, oh, your inventory's full. So to change that, you cancel out of the dialogue, open the menu, go to
give
item,
it to yogurt,
go to the character, and then you have to find someone to transfer to that has an open slot, and then you take that item, and then if you want to give that item to someone else, you have to open the same menu and then move that item to the person you want to have it.
Right.
And there's a lot of chests and chest hunting in the game.
Yeah.
And it's a huge pain in the ass.
Having come from NES era RPGs, that didn't bug me as much. It is still a very small inventory on each character, which does get frustrating. But I was just already used to the juggle of having to move items around.
I did find a ROM hack on romhacking.net by a user named Alianger, Alianger. If you just search Shining Force gameplay improvement, I believe is what's called. And they fix terrain. They fix the inventory system. So when you pick something up, it's like it just auto passes to someone that has an open inventory slot. They fix experience rollover. So previously, if you needed 10 experience to level up and you just gained 30 experience, it would just gain you the 10 and then put you at 0.
Yeah, you'd lose
now
out.
It rolls over into the next level.
Nice.
So there are some major gameplay improvements of the Genesis version. So if you're going to be playing the game, I highly recommend playing with that ROM hack because it really is patches the game would have had if it came out in the patchable game era to begin with.
Right. And some of those improvements you did see in the sequels as well.
Right. But as far as gameplay, it is, I hate to say it because I really did enjoy my time with it, but it does sort of feel like a mixed bag. It's very slow. The inventory is very frustrating. But compared to other strategy games, it's much more forgiving. It has much more charm. I'd say it's a much more enjoyable experience if you can handle the slowness and how fussy it can feel.
Yeah, or if you have a fast forward.
Right. If you have fast forward and rewind, that fixes 90% of your problems. The ROM hack with fast forward and rewind, bam, you're done. You just fixed every problem I personally have with the game, and it is now fantastic.
Right.
As far as reception, Mean Machines gave it a solid 91 in their May 93 issue. Mega placed
the authoritative source is Mean Machines.
Good old Mean Machines. Yeah. Mega placed the game at 33 in their top Mega Drive games list, and Retro Gamer listed it as the 86th top retro game in issue 8 of their magazine. Which they're on issue like 790 billion by now, so it's been a while. That list might have changed.
Right.
But Shining Force, I've noticed a lot more love for it in European territories where Genesis was a bigger deal.
Right.
So our European
was a
listeners,
big deal over here too.
Yeah, it was. But the Super Nintendo was a smaller deal over there, which made the Genesis feel bigger.
Right.
You know.
Also, the Genesis didn't have much of an RPG fan base in North America.
True. Yeah. Well, there weren't much in the way of RPGs to begin with. You have Crusader of Sinti, Shining Games, Phantasy Star's a big one.
Yes.
Yes, it is. So the game reviewed well. It seems very beloved. Most of the publications I find still going on about how amazing Shining Force is, they all kind of came from the UK that I noticed.
I used to always be able to find reviews from EGM and GamePro until Game Rankings went away. So now we'll never know what they had to say about it.
I do feel like in North America, Shining Force has kind of been Nintendo washed, which is the act of Nintendo franchises getting big after 20 or 30 years and kind of retroactively rolling over other competing franchises that may be more fun.
Right. It's a shame because at the time, anyone that I knew that knew of Shining Force thought that it was good and that it was original. Because we didn't have Fire Emblem, obviously, so we didn't have anything to compare it against, and I don't know anyone who actively disliked the game or this series. Everybody that I knew that knew of it and was willing to try a strategy RPG really ended up enjoying it.
And I'll say this: I have problems with the game now, but I played the game after Tactics Ogre on PSP, after Final Fantasy Tactics, after all these other much later, more recent, after XCOM, so many newer tactical strategy games. And going back to this, most other strategy RPGs from this era, if you play modern stuff and go back to them, they're unplayable, which you've been kind of alluding to, but I don't know that you've outright said it. They're hard to go back to.
It's true.
Very hard. This is just a little hard to go back to and easily fixed with a ROM hack and some emulator functions. So I don't want it to seem like I'm bitching about the game because for its time, it was very good.
And I think that it holds up better than most of its contemporaries.
Most definitely.
Especially if you're looking at the series as a whole and not just the first game, it definitely holds up better. Even just the first game holds up pretty well.
By all accounts, and I know some big Genesis fans are probably shouting that we're covering Shining Force 1 and talking about the problems with it, rather than covering Shining Force 2, which is often hailed as the best, not just Shining Force, but Shining game. My reasoning was because I wanted to play the first Shining Force, and I've heard that the second one is so much better that I won't be able to go back to the first one. So that's why we're even covering the first Shining Force, is not because I think it's bad and I want to get through it, but because I hear the sequel is so much better.
Yeah, it is.
That it's difficult.
Shining Force 2 is really great. I still love Shining Force 1, but it's hard to talk about it without also saying it's great, but not compared to Shining Force 2.
Yeah. So that's the entire reason we're even looking at the first one. And if the second one was even just a minor improvement, and I know it's not, I know it's a massive improvement, but if it were even just minor fixes, I would already be on board with, it's fantastic. So I'm excited to experience Shining Force 2. I've still seen nor played any of it. Never even seen a screenshot of it. No idea. Totally blind. I'm going in. Nice. And I'm excited for that. But tell me about the legacy that Shining in the Darkness and subsequently Shining Force has left.
Well, I just want to look at the Shining Force games. There's way too much of the Shining series. That series is insane.
Yeah, I listed, what is it?
37 games.
Currently 37 titles is how many Shining games
including a current one that is on the Switch and the PS4.
What?
Shining Resonance.
Oh, all right then.
I have it. It's in the other room. Anyway, so after Shining Force, we got Shining Force Gaiden. We didn't. Japan got Shining Force Gaiden.
These are the Game Gear ones, right?
Yeah, and then we got Shining Force: The Sword of Hajia, which is just Gaiden 2, but it was a localization of it. And those were both on Game Gear. They actually had a pretty decent story. The first one actually ties into the first game quite a bit too.
I had thought the first Gaiden was a remake, but I've come to learn that it is not. It's like a continuation.
Right. Yeah. It follows up the story. And they played pretty well as far as Game Gear ports of Genesis games. These were some of the better ones, which it's not. It's easy to port this kind of a game to a handheld, so it makes sense that they did it right. But they did.
Right.
They're good ports of good games, or good iterations of good games, that I would say. Then you have Shining Force 2, which released on the Genesis in 93 in Japan, 94 in the rest of the world. And yeah, it's incredible. You should play Shining Force 2. Then you have...
I'm planning on it.
Good. Do it.
All right, then.
And you have Shining Force CD on the Sega CD, which released worldwide in 94. It is those two Game Gear games upgraded to look like Genesis games. And it also has a third scenario. So if you want to play those games, but you don't want to deal with a Game Gear, you can play them on the Sega CD and prepare yourself for so much load time. Holy shit. Like, I enjoy... Also, don't buy an original copy. It costs all the money. Last I checked, it was like $300 or something like that.
Holy crap.
Yeah, it's expensive. But it is good. It is a good collection, and since the Sega CD will play burn games, just burn it. Or play it on an emulator, because it's a Sega CD. I'm the only fucking person left that has one.
No, there's probably one more.
Okay, there's one other guy who still has a working Sega CD.
There you go.
Then there's Shining Force Gaiden: The Final Conflict. It was the last 2D game in the series. It was also Game Gear, and it never left Japan. And I want to say that was in 95. And you have Shining Force 3 on the Saturn, which released in Japan in 97 and worldwide in 98. And when we say worldwide, we mean Shining Force 3 Part 1 released worldwide. Because Shining Force 3 was released on 3 separate discs. Were the 3 discs in one box? No. That would make sense. That's how other 3-disc RPGs did it in that era.
What a ridiculous notion.
No, it was released as 3 separate games for some reason, and only the first ever left Japan.
Now, there are fan translations of parts 2 and 3.
Finally.
They seem to be pretty celebrated. They're recent-ish.
Yes, they're very recent.
This year, last year?
Yeah, within the last couple of years. And they will import data from the original Western release of Shining Force 3, which is excellent. So I do recommend those. Those are on the Saturn, and they are... I've only played the first one because I speak English, and it is excellent. I need to go back and play the other two now that they are available.
Yeah.
But then... After Gap, we got Shining Force Neo and Shining Force Exa on the PS2.
Yeah.
These came out in 2005 and 2007. These are not strategy RPGs.
Uh-huh.
They are action RPGs. They were designed by Neverland, who actually did the Lufia games, and they also made a Dreamcast game called Record of Lodoss War, and Sega liked it so much that they were like, what if you turned that into Shining Force? And so it's
ruined it.
Yeah, it's basically just Record of Lodoss War, only with Shining Force. And the first one, Shining Force Neo, tries to retell the story of Shining Force 1 very poorly. Only it makes it super edgy and anime.
Oh, boy.
I don't care for either of these, but they did get international localizations because, of course, they did.
Right.
Yeah, Shining Force 3 was the last turn-based strategy game in the series. Actually, I think there was a DS or 3DS game in Japan only.
I feel like there was, but I couldn't name it.
The series was dead by then.
Yeah.
Now, there were other Shining games, and none of them were developed by Climax or by Camelot after Shining Force 3. They were done with the franchise. Actually, I think Climax was done after Shining Force 1. And Camelot was done after Shining Force 3. After that, it was all other internal Sega studios or third-party studios that just did whatever they wanted with it.
Yeah. Let's talk ports.
Yeah.
The big one we want to talk about is the GBA one. Came out on June 8th, 2004. This includes new characters, new battles, more plot points, a revamped difficulty system, and some gameplay changes.
Yeah, and it's available in all regions.
And I would go on record as saying this is the definitive version of the game. It fixes inventory issues. It has a less tedious standard interface. There's more information given about the battlefield, what turn order you're on.
When Shining Soul came out, I was so excited. I was like, holy shit, there's a new Shining Force game. And I picked it up and I was like, this is not Shining Force. What is this? And it was still fun. Shining Soul is still a fun little dungeon crawlery game. And then this came out, a couple of years afterwards, and I was like, oh shit, it really is a new Shining Force, and I bought it, and it was the first Shining Force.
It's very good. It adds a lot more dialogue.
Yeah. Which may just be a localization thing. There's a chance all the dialogue is the same as the Japanese version.
True, very true. But just much less tedious feeling. Really fixes all of my problems. My only issue with it in this form is that if you're not a fan of the kind of zoomed in, washed out GBA look, basically if you're not playing on a GBA, it's going to look kind of weirdly zoomed in and washed out. But that's just a byproduct of playing GBA games, not on a little tiny screen.
Right.
Which is the only downside. Beyond that, it is a far improved version of the game.
Definitely.
It was on the Wii.
On the Virtual Console.
Came out Japan, July 10th, 07, North America, July 23rd, 07, and PAL territories, August 3rd, 07. It came out on iOS on July 29th, 2010. It has since been delisted.
Jerks.
It came out on Windows, Mac, and Linux via Steam on January 26th, 2011.
Yeah, which has since been rolled into the current Genesis collection.
Right.
So if you purchased it back then, you can play it in the new version now.
There are multiple compilations that you can find the game in. It's in the Sega Smash Pack on Dreamcast and PC. It's in Sonic's Ultimate Genesis
That was
collection.
just PC.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, Smash Pack 1 was on Dreamcast. Smash Pack 2 never released on Dreamcast. It was just announced for it.
Well, it's on PC.
Yes.
It's on Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, which was on 360 and PS3. Again, it was on the Wii Virtual Console, not that you can get it.
Right.
And it is currently on the newest Genesis Classics Collection, which is on Switch and PC and literally everything ever.
Right.
So, like so many other Sega games that we've discussed in Sega Simmer,
readily
which
available.
It still is at the time of recording. Yes, readily available and in multiple slightly improved versions.
Yeah.
So go play it.
Yes.
And
then play Shining Force 2.
Yeah, especially if you're planning to play Shining Force 2, because you might have a hard time going back to this one.
And also play Shining Force CD if you can find it. And then play the Saturn games.
Right. As far as final thoughts, Shining Force, I think, is a game that excels at interesting characters set in a kind of silly world of centaurs and squid wizards. And it has more heart than a lot of its competitors.
Yeah.
And while the gameplay itself is a little simplistic by modern strategy RPG standards, the more manageable difficulty makes it a much more approachable game. I do think the vanilla Genesis version is a bit too tedious to get a real recommendation from me as something that you might play in 2021. But I would highly, highly recommend the GBA port or the Genesis version with fast forward and the gameplay improvement hack. Those two fixes alone bring it up almost to the level of the GBA port for me.
If for me, it would be if you are. It depends entirely on how accustomed you are to 8-bit and 16-bit RPGs. If you are deep in just embedded in that mindset, none of it's going to bother you. You can just play the original one and it's fine. But that hack sounds amazing.
If the inventory in Earthbound doesn't bother the shit out of you, then you'll probably be fine with it.
Yeah, it'll be fine. But no, I agree with all that. It was a great strategy RPG. I still think that just about all the games in the series still hold up pretty well today. And I also agree that it just has so much more charm than a lot of the other games, other similar games in that genre. Having only played, when it came out anyway, having only played Military Madness beforehand, and now it suddenly had a story and individual characters, and there were towns I could visit. It was just absolutely amazing, and I was super impressed by it. So I still hold up that it's one of the better games in the genre, or one of the better series in the genre too.
And if you're listening to this episode in the far-flung future, then and you're lamenting the fact that you can't get that cool Fire Emblem remake Nintendo did because it's no longer available, then rest assured, Shining Force is there for you.
There.
And Sega would like to sell it to you.
Yeah, and what's more, if you buy it on Steam, you can apply that hack from romhacking.net to the Steam version.
This is true.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's Shining Force. You should go play it and then play Shining Force 2.
Yes.
In that order.
And then the rest of the series.
And then the rest of the series.
Yes.
But that's it. That's our show. Thanks so much for listening. And if you would like to thank us, then you can do so by going on over to patreon.com/retrowarriors and giving us money if you want. We'd like that.
You can also just thank us, but yeah, we do want your money.
You can also just thank us.
Yeah.
You can also come hang out with us in Discord. You can rate and review the show on your podcast aggregator of choice, because as much as I bitched about the aggregators, they're also big traffic drivers. So please go rate and review us on them. It would mean a lot. And we want to thank the following patrons who brought you this episode.
Yeah.
We're going to start with, hi, Ross.
Sexy Excel got me pregnant. I forgot all about Sexy Excel.
Neil Hayes.
Juan Sanchez.
I am still holding Tudix.
Austin Wheeler.
Nick M.
Mike Morse.
And Elson Raves are all wonderful patrons that support us at patreon.com/retrowarriors and get cool things like Talking Wizards or Andrew talking about capes with us before we started this episode.
It was a different pre-show. It was a very different one.
Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I believe this is technically the end of Sega-Simber.
This is, though this episode will be posted in January for non-patrons. Right. But yeah, this is going to be our last Sega-Simber episode. So happy Sega-Simber, Justin.
Happy Sega-Simber, Saturn.
Happy Sega-Simber, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. And as always, let us cling together.